Ayana Blake had just transferred to Meadow Ridge High from a neighborhood that was only whispered about when mentioned a tough corner of Detroit where survival was a daily battle, and stepping back meant defeat. Beneath her quiet exterior were invisible scars. Memories of battles she never wanted but could never avoid, but the students at Meadow Ridge didn't see a warrior, they only saw a quiet black girl, an easy target for their cruel jokes, so they challenged her day after day, slowly pushing her to her breaking point until one afternoon they appeared with scissors and triumphant laughter, determined to humiliate her. A cold snip, a sharp intake of breath, and her hair fell to the classroom floor in silence. Someone whispered it was just a joke. The teacher turned away and the room fell into a suffocating silence. They waited for the tears, the weakness and surrender. But Ayana stood there unwavering, without a tremble or a hint of fear. They thought she was weak. They thought she would break. They were wrong. The Monday morning light appeared dull and pale, as if Detroit's sky wanted to bid Ayana Blake a cold goodbye. Sitting in the old car, silently cruising down the winding streets toward Meadow Ridge High, Ayana watched the rows of upscale homes glide past the car window, each house with neatly trimmed fences, shiny cars lined up in driveways. Everything seemed to mock her, reminding her that she didn't belong here. Her mother, Teresa Blake, drove in silence. Her gaze seemed purposely fixed away from Ayana, focusing only on the road, occasionally glancing at the rearview mirror to adjust her neatly styled curls, her red lipstick, as if trying to conceal words she never wanted to speak. Ayana understood it wasn't just the silence of a tired mother, but an invisible distance that had long formed between them. Arguments and disagreements had pushed them further apart, creating a vast space neither knew how to fill. When the old Honda stopped at the school gate, Ayana let it out a long breath, trying to steady herself before her Meadow Ridge High stood as a symbol of power and wealth. The shining white stone steps, the expansive glass doors, and the bold lettering, Meadow Ridge High. Excellence through community gleamed arrogantly. Ayana's throat tightened. She gripped her backpack straps, her palms sweaty. Her mother cleared her throat and coldly said, without turning around, "Let's go. Don't let them think I didn't teach you right. No hug, no good luck." Wish not even a warm glance. Ayana knew that tenderness had long been a luxury. Between them, she stepped out of the car, the door closing softly, but with a chilling finality. Behind her, Ayana stood still. For a moment before walking toward the school gates, the crowd of students in front of the gate felt like a sea of strangers. Laughter and calls echoed around her, but they all belonged to a world she had never known. She felt every eye that glanced her way, quick and judgmental. Her tightly braided hair, dark skin, and unfamiliar appearance made her stand out in the crowd, but not in a proud way. Instead, it was a reason for whispers and stares as she entered the school hallway. Ayana immediately noticed how different it was from her old school in Detroit. The hallways gleamed, the floors spotless, the lockers neatly arranged in alternating shades of blue and white, a faint scent of lemon at the air. It all felt like an unspoken declaration that this wasn't a place for a child who had grown up among peeling buildings, honking car horns, and brawls that were part of daily life entering her new classroom. The homeroom teacher, Mrs. Kendricks, greeted her with a forced, overly sweet smile. "Welcome, Ayana. I've heard you're a very strong student." The way she emphasized the word strong made Ayana uncomfortable, as though it was more mockery than encouragement. She silently walked to the last desk in the corner of the room, trying to avoid the scrutinizing gazes of her classmates throughout the first lesson. She didn't speak, just quietly wrote her name in the empty notebook before her. The whispers and sidelong glances only added weight to her heart. At lunch, Ayana held her tray and walked through the large cafeteria, feeling like she was navigating a battlefield of invisible enemies. Groups of students had already claimed their tables, laughing and chatting comfortably as if they'd known each other for years. Ayana slowly made her way to an empty table by the window, but a girl quickly slid into the seat before she could reach it. No apology, just a challenging look and a mocking smile. Finally, Ayana sat at a small table near the door, in a shadowy corner she hoped would offer enough peace to get through the endless lunch break, and there, for the first time, she saw them Austin Rell, Kyle Foster, and Brianna Harley, the overweight girl always trying to fit in with the popular group by bullying others. The three of them walked into the cafeteria as if it was their personal stage. When Austin's eyes met Ayan's, she could feel the hostility lurking behind his smirk. Brianna, walking close behind, looked at her with a mix of envy and contempt, as if Ayana was a thorn in her side, a nuisance she wanted to erase immediately. Ayana didn't lower her gaze. She didn't shy away from their stares. She just silently locked eyes with them, her expression cold and unyielding. A silent declaration that no matter how different and foreign this place was, she wouldn't be easily defeated. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch, and stood up, walking away cautiously with a sense of defense. She knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead would undoubtedly be long and filled with challenges. But she had no choice but to keep moving forward, ready to face whatever lay ahead. From the moment Ayana stepped out of the cafeteria, she knew that the world wasn't going to easily accept someone like her. The hallway, now bustling after lunch, felt like a sea of people parting in her wake. An invisible gap, a subtle but sharp distance, the crowd instinctively avoided her whispers, loud enough for her to hear, but too quiet for her to respond. Every glance was filled with a mixture of disdain and curiosity, as if she were something foreign, just introduced from another world. The afternoon classes dragged on heavily. Ayana tried to focus on the teacher's lecture, but the constant feeling of being watched kept her tense during math class. When Ayana correctly answered a difficult question, the class fell silent for a moment, then soft laughter bubbled up from behind her. She didn't turn around, but she knew it was from Austin's group, a voice light. Yet full of mockery reached her ears, must have gone to those slum schools to get that good. Ayana tightened her grip on her pen, trying to suppress the anger. Rising sharply inside her, she reminded herself that this wasn't the first time she had heard such words, that silence was truly her greatest strength. But it wasn't just Austin Rell. The attention Ayana received was particularly marked by Brianna Hartley. Brianna, an overweight girl who was often the target of others' teasing, chose not to empathize with those weaker than herself. Instead, she joined Austin's group by becoming a bully herself. It gave her a sense of security and a way to avoid mockery, and Ayana, a stranger and outsider, was the perfect target for Brianna to assert her place in the group after school. As Ayana quietly stood by her locker, she heard the heavy, familiar footsteps behind her. Brianna approached, pretending to clumsily bump into Ayana, deliberately pushing her back a step. Brianna smirked, her expression both contemptuous and challenging. "Oh, sorry. I'm just not used to seeing someone like you here. It's a little surprising. A few other students nearby overheard and quickly turned to look, some covering their mouths as they giggled. Ayana kept her face impassive. Not reacting strongly, she simply responded with a flat, "It's fine." The calmness surprised Brianna, and a flash of irritation crossed her face. Ayana understood the psychology of people like Brianna who use their own weakness as an excuse to hurt others. Brianna had once been a victim, someone who endured harsh judgments about her appearance, but fear had turned her into a hunter, seeking out weaker targets to fill the insecurity that plagued her the next morning when Ayana opened her lock. Her door, a pile of paper scraps, fell to her feet, kneeling down to examine them. Ayana saw that the scraps were covered with cruel words written in black ink. The words were sloppily scrawled with clear intent. "Go back to where you belong. No one wants you here around her." A few students noticed the scene, but quickly turned away as though nothing had happened. Brianna, standing not far off, smiled smugly, as if she had just completed a difficult task handed down by Austin's group. Ayana calmly gathered the scraps into her backpack, her heart heavy. These bullying tactics were nothing new to her, but what hurt the most was the indifference of everyone who witnessed it. No one wanted to speak up in her defense, as if they all silently agreed that Ayana was the one at fault for being in this prestigious school. That afternoon, while waiting for the bus outside, Ayana noticed Principal Darnell Hughes, a tall black man walking toward her. His gaze was calm, yet filled with concern. "Ayana, are you okay?" Ayana was momentarily taken aback by the first sincere question she'd received since arriving. She simply nodded. "I'm fine, sir." Principal Hughes looked deeply into her eyes as if he understood everything was going through. His voice was soft but heavy with meaning. "You don't need to pretend to be strong with me. I've seen many new students like you come here. They think that suffering in silence is the best solution, but in reality it only makes things worse." Ayana looked up at him, trying to keep her voice steady. "But if I speak up, what then? Who will believe me? Who will protect me?" Principal Hughes smiled gently, but firmly. "I will believe you, and I will protect you. But first, I need you to believe in yourself." His words were like a warm breeze, gently seeping into Ayana's weary heart for the first time since setting foot in Meadow Ridge High. She didn't feel entirely alone, but she also understood that this was only the beginning, and the road ahead would still be filled with harsh challenges. When the bus arrived, Ayana stepped on and found a quiet seat by the window as the bus pulled away from the school. She glanced back one last time at the gleaming building through the foggy glass. Ayana's heart was no longer weighed down just by the biased stares, the insults, or the bullying. Instead, she saw a small yet powerful light, a light born from the genuine empathy of the one person who had trusted her. Ayana knew that the real battle was just beginning, and this time, she was determined not to back down. Since her brief conversation with Principal Hughes, Ayana had begun each day at school with a faint hope. But soon enough she realized that Meadow Ridge High wasn't going to change just because of a few kind words from a teacher. The bullying didn't lessen. Instead, it became more subtle and painful, like tiny needles poking at her every day, invisible but excruciating down to her bones. Austin Rell had never directly touched her with his admired status at the school. He knew that simply standing from a distance, observing and occasionally smirking in contempt, was enough to hurt her. Austin always kept just enough of a distance to avoid being directly accused, yet always remained close enough that Ayana could feel his sneering gaze on every step she took. As for Brianna, the one Ayana once thought might empathize with her differences, she had only become more aggressive and cruel. Brianna had never forgiven Ayana for embarrassing her in front of their group that day. Every time Ayana walked into class, Brianna would loudly sniff the air and say, just loud enough for those around to hear, "Do I smell something?" It smells so familiar, kind of like the scent from the ghetto. Laughter erupted around her. Ayana didn't turn around. She continued walking to her seat, her back straight, her expression unreadable. But her palms clenched so tightly that they ached. Insults like that came daily, each time with a different variation, but always with the same message. She didn't belong here. Kyle Foster preferred a more direct approach, but he was still clever enough to not cross the line too much. He would always accidentally bump into Ayana in the hallway, his shoulder jostling her as if the hallway wasn't wide enough. After each of these encounters, he shrugged, pretending innocence. "Oh, sorry, didn't see you there." Then he'd walk off with his friends, laughing loudly, enjoying the moment. Every time Ayana would grit her teeth and walk on quietly, she knew they were trying to provoke her into losing control, into becoming the violent person the whole school was waiting for. Ayana didn't want to become what they expected in English class. Every time she read a passage aloud, she would immediately hear whispering laughter from behind Austin, and Brianna would intentionally repeat every word she mispronounced or said slightly differently. The term ghetto girl slowly became the nickname she heard almost every day. It started with whispers, but gradually, whenever she walked past, it was louder and clearer, as if the whole school had agreed to call her by that name. But what hurt Ayana the most wasn't the cruel words. It was the indifference, the cold detachment from those around her. Those who didn't directly bully her but always chose to look away, pretending they didn't see even the teachers, the ones she hoped would protect. Always turned a blind eye. The math teacher, whenever she heard the giggles behind her, would just furrow her brow for a moment before continuing the lesson as if nothing had happened. The English teacher was even clearer, always choosing not to call on Ayana to speak, avoiding any unnecessary trouble from the other students each day at school. Felt like stepping into a psychological battlefield where she had to fight not only the emotional wounds, but also struggled to keep herself from losing control. The anger smoldered within her like a small flame, waiting for a reason to erupt sometimes in the bathroom, standing alone before the mirror. She would stare at her cold face and quietly remind herself that she couldn't let those people win by turning her into someone she didn't want to be. But one day, as Ayana walked through the hallway to her art class, she accidentally overheard Brianna's familiar voice coming from the corner by the stairs, eagerly chatting with Kyle. "What do you think? If I really teach her a lesson?" "I don't think just talking anymore is enough fun." Kyle laughed, both excited and cautious. "What do you mean?" Brianna whispered, full of secretive intent, but still loud enough for Ayana to hear every word. "I want her to know her place here once and for all. Let the whole school see." Ayana pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding in her chest. She understood now that the silent endurance she had been practicing was no longer enough. What lay ahead was not just the accidental insults or the gentle jostles anymore. Brianna was ready to cross the line, turning their subtle bullying into something bigger, far more dangerous. When Ayana entered the art class that day, her heart was heavy with worry but also more determined than ever. She knew she couldn't stay silent and endure much longer, and she knew no matter what happened next, this would be the moment she had to face the nightmare that was Meadow Ridge High. Head on the art class that day began in an unusually heavy atmosphere. Ayana had just sat down at her spot in the back corner of the room, her gaze instinctively drifting toward the window as if searching for a fleeting moment of peace. But almost immediately she felt the eyes on her, laden with meaning and expectation. The air in the room seemed to freeze, filled with whispers and half-smiles, particularly from the corner where Austin and Kyle sat. Brianna was sitting directly behind Ayana. Today, a change from her usual behavior of keeping her distance to avoid making eye contact with Ayana, this made Ayana even more alert, but she couldn't turn around. Every time she felt uneasy, she could only reassure herself that no matter how much Brianna hated her, she wouldn't dare do anything too extreme in front of the whole class and Mrs. Henley. But Ayana was wrong amid the stillness. As everyone was focused on their drawings, Ayana began to hear faint laughter from behind her, growing clearer as it came from Austin. His voice was low, just enough for the group to hear, but also enough for Ayana to sense the deliberate provocation. "Do you really dare to do it, Brianna? Or are you just talking?" "Of course I do." Brianna responded immediately, her voice trembling slightly but firm with determination. This was her chance to assert her place in the group, and more importantly, to get back at Ayana for the wounded pride she had waited far too long for a chance to prove to Austin and Kyle that she was strong enough, bold enough to stand beside them. Ayana felt her heart race as she heard the cold, metallic snap of scissors from behind, but before she could react, before she could turn around, a sharp pain ran down her neck, freezing her in place. The scissors' snap was brief, but loud enough to send a tremor through the entire room. A thick black braid, carefully woven, fell softly before Ayana's eyes, lying motionless on the pristine white desk like an unforgivable insult. The room immediately fell into a suffocating silence. Nearby students gaped in shock, some covering their mouths in disbelief, but no one dared speak. Austin let out a deliberately amused laugh, pretended to gasp in surprise before quickly covering his mouth, while Brianna stood behind Ayana, her hand still gripping the scissors, her face flickering with panic, but quickly masked by a challenging smile. "Oh, I must have done it by mistake," Brianna said purposely, loud enough for the whole class to hear. Her eyes never left Ayana, as if waiting for a reaction, a burst of anger that she was certain would come. Ayana remained still, her eyes locked on her own braid lying on the desk. Her heart no longer burned with anger, but with a deep sense of hurt, an insult to her dignity that cut through her. That hair wasn't just a part of her body. It was a symbol of her pride, her self-respect, something she had fought to preserve, despite all the wounds she had endured. Mrs. Henley's voice rang out, panic, stricken but distant, as if coming from far away. "What's going on?" Brianna. Ayana didn't respond. She slowly stood up, her hand trembling slightly as she picked up the seed braid. Brianna instinctively took a step back, the first time she realized she might have gone too far. Kyle stopped laughing, his eyes now filled with fear. Only A kept his half-smile, but his gaze was no longer as confident as before. Ayana's voice rang out softly, calmly, but with a force that shattered the suffocating silence enveloping the room. "You think this is funny?" Brianna tried to mask her confusion by pretending to laugh dismissively. "Oh, come on. It's just hair. Why are you overreacting?" Ayana looked directly into Brianna's eyes. Her gaze cold but disturbingly calm. "This isn't just hair, it's respect. It's dignity. But I don't think you'll ever understand that, will you?" Brianna fell silent. Her smile frozen on her face, she hadn't expected Ayana to stay so composed. The students around them started murmuring, realizing for the first time that Ayana wasn't just a quiet girl who could be bullied easily. Ayan walked slowly, holding her severed braid, leaving her seat and passing by Austin and Kyle without glancing at them. Once the class parted to let her through each step, Ayana took ringing loud and clear, affirming that she would never allow herself to be defeated when she reached the door. Ayana stopped for a moment, turned to look at Brian. One last time, her voice calm but carrying a clear warning. "You've made your choice, Brianna. And from now on, you'll have to live with it." With that, Ayana walked out of the classroom, the door closing behind her with a decisive click, echoing like the final note in a symphony of silence and restraint she had endured for so long. Inside the art room, the silence returned, but this time it was Brian who felt the unease, for she had just realized that she had ignited a battle she was never truly ready to face from the start. As the door to the art class closed behind her, Ayana stopped. She stood still for a few seconds, feeling the rapid beating of her heart in her chest. Every insult, every judgmental glance, and the cold silences from all this time suddenly rushed back with a force blending into a wave of fury. Rising stronger than ever before, Ayana could feel it deep inside a fire she had once tried to control. Now blazing fiercely, she couldn't walk away like this. She couldn't remain silent and passive. One more time, Ayana slowly turned around, pushed the door open forcefully, and stepped back into the classroom, catching everyone off guard. Her sudden return plunged the art class into complete silence. Her eyes were cold, sharp, sweeping across every face until they stopped on Brianna, who stood frozen. The scissors still in her hand, her mocking smile from earlier now replaced with vague concern. "You wanted to see my reaction, didn't you, Brianna?" Ayana said, her voice clear, icy, but remarkably calm. "Well, now you'll see." Before Brianna could respond, Ayana moved quickly, determined, and for F. Brianna instinctively raised her hands to defend herself, but it was too late. A punch as fast as lightning sharp and precise landed directly on Brianna's jaw, sending her sprawling backward, crashing to the floor in shock. The scissors clattered to the tile floor, echoing like an urgent alarm. In the stunned classroom, the room erupted into chaos. Kyle Foster, trying to win Austin's favor, rushed toward Ayana to grab her arm, but he didn't realize Ayana was well accustomed to street fights in Detroit. With a swift spin, Yana expertly seized Kyle's wrist, twisting it back, making him cry out in pain. Then, with a simple yet powerful motion, she pushed Kyle to the ground, leaving him sprawled there, dazed and unable to believe what had just happened. The atmosphere in the room thickened as gasps of astonishment filled the air. No one had ever imagined Ayana, always quiet and restrained, would react so strongly and decisively. Austin Rell stood still, his face pale for the first time. He felt a strange sensation overtaking him, real unease and fear. Austin was used to being in charge, accustomed to manipulating others to his will, but now he was faced with a completely different Ayana, and Ayana who was no longer a silent victim, but someone strong enough to fight back against anyone who tried to harm her teacher. Henley, snapping out of her shock, hurried over, her voice trembling. "Stop! Ayana, Brianna, What is going on here? But Ayana didn't look at her teacher calmly. She walked up to Brianna, who was sitting on the floor, tears streaming down her face from both pain and fear. Ayana crouched down, speaking in a soft tone, yet loud enough for everyone around to hear. Clearly, do you get it now? Brianna, bullying others doesn't make you stronger. It just shows how weak you really are. Then, Ayana stood up straight. Her gaze turning to Austin, who was still frozen without saying another word. Her eyes sent a clear message. Anyone behind this cruel game would have to take responsibility. Austin instinctively took a small step back, gripping the edge of the drawing table behind him as if searching for his last point of support. He had never felt threatened like this, because he realized Ayana wasn't just some weak target to pick on. She had enough strength and courage to fight back, even beat him at his own playground where he thought he was the one in control. Ayana turned and walked out of the room once more, but this time, no one dared mock or whisper about her. The silence now was one of awe and shock, a silent admiration from those who had witnessed everything but had never spoken up to defend her. The sound of Ayana's footsteps echoed clearly in the empty hallway. She took a deep breath, feeling surprisingly lighthearted. Even though she knew there would be consequences for what had just happened, Ayana had no regrets. She was no longer a victim from this day on. Ayana Blake would stand tall, facing all challenges ahead, with her own strength and pride, as Ayana stepped out of the art class. The noise from inside still echoed behind her. The hallway was quiet, but each step she took rang clearly, decisively. With the weight of the decision she had just made, Ayana never imagined that one day she would have to resort to violence in a place like Meadow Ridge High, where restraint and submission had always been the prerequisites for her survival. But this time, silence was no longer a viable option. The moment Brianna cut her hair had shattered all boundaries of self-respect, turning it into a confrontation Ayana could not back down from. She had barely taken a few steps when the sound of high heels clacking rapidly behind her reached her ears. Instantly, she recognized the familiar, anxious yet tense voice of her teacher, Miss Henley Ayana. "Stop right there. Do you know how serious what just happened in class is?" Ayana slowly turned around, looking straight into Miss Henley's panicked eyes. Her voice was calm and resolute as she answered, "Yes, I know, ma'am." Miss Henley's gaze was filled with unease, but she quickly regained her composure, attempting to put on her usual stern demeanor. "Follow me immediately. We're going to Principal Hughes' office to clear this up. Do you understand?" Ayana. Ayana did not protest. She simply nodded at that moment. She felt no regret for her actions. But she knew this would be the moment that decided her fate at this school. Facing Principal Hughes didn't frighten her as much as knowing the blatant injustice that was about to unfold. She knew all too well that with the power and status of Austin, Kyle, and Brianna's families, the truth would easily be twisted. They walked into the administration area in a tense, heavy silence. Principal Hughes' office was at the end of the hallway, the door slightly ajar, as though waiting for Ayana. As she stepped inside, her eyes met the sharp yet compassionate gaze of Principal Hughes. He sat behind a large, dark wood desk, neatly dressed, his face stern, but radiating a calm and trustworthy presence. "It is my forsindo, Adises," says the near Vasansi, only silently, a black member of the administrative staff at Meadow Ridge High, and that made him more aware of the isolation Ayana was experiencing than anyone else here. Principal Hughes nodded gently, his voice deep but firm. Please, sit down. Ayana, we need to talk about what just happened. Ayana sat down in the chair in front of him, her hands clasped together tightly. She was ready to explain, but just then there was a commotion outside the door. Less than a few seconds later, the door swung open hurriedly and 3 sets of parents stormed in their faces, filled with anger and outrage. The Reddle family, Mr. Michael Rell in an expensive suit standing next to his wife. Mrs. Laura, their gazes powerful behind them, were Kyle Foster's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Foster looking furious, and especially Brianna's mother, Mrs. Emily Hartley with a face flushed with rage. Mr. Michael Rell was the first to speak his voice, booming with authority. Principal Hughes, I cannot believe this school allowed something like this to happen. My son just called to say a student attacked a classmate during art class. This is unacceptable. Mrs. Emily Hartley immediately chimed in her voice, sharp and agitated. Exactly. My daughter is terrified and hurt. I want to know who dared to do such a thing and how the school plans to handle this. Principal Hughes raised a hand gently to calm the situation, trying to keep his voice steady and neutral. I understand your concerns, but first we need to remain calm and hear the story from all sides. Ayana, could you please explain exactly what happened? Ayana was about to speak when she was immediately interrupted by Mr. Michael Riddell, his voice laced with mockery. We don't need any excuses from this girl. Austin made it very clear that she was the one who started the trouble and attacked her classmates without reason. Someone like her is a threat to the safety of all students at this school. Ayana clenched her fists, struggling to keep her composure against the unjust words being thrust at her. Her gaze met Principal Hughes' eyes, silently pleading for him to believe her, to understand that the situation wasn't as simple as they were making it out to be. Principal Hughes gave a slight nod, then spoke in his calm, firm voice. I know everyone is eager to get to the bottom of this, but as principal, I cannot address such a serious matter based solely on one side's account. I need to hear Ayana's version of the story first. His words made the parents fall silent for a moment, but Mrs. Hartley quickly lost her patience, slamming her hand on the table, her voice trembling with anger. Impossible. My daughter was assaulted and this girl's hair was only cut a little. It's nothing serious, I use. And yet she responded with violence like that. Clearly, this girl is a dangerous threat. Her harsh words hit Ayana like a slap only cut a little. That phrase echoed in her mind like a bitter insult, as though her self-respect and dignity were worth no more than a few strands of hair. Principal Hughes looked directly into Ayana's eyes. He understood better than anyone else the weight of what she was going through, but he also knew that he was facing a huge challenge. The pressure from the powerful people in front of him was immense. Ayana knew that this unjust judgment had only just begun, and she had to be ready to face it all. But no matter what happened next, she swore she would never bow her head to the injustice surrounding her. The heavy silence enveloped Principal Hughes' office for what seemed like an eternity, following Mrs. Emily Hartley's sharp accusation. Ayana sat quietly, her hands clenched tightly, her gaze fixed on the desk as she tried to hold back the fury boiling inside her. She knew that in this moment her word carried little weight in front of the people in the room, those who were accustomed to having their voices heard, their power protected, regardless of the truth. Principal Hughes sat upright, his sharp eyes scanning the faces of the parents one by one. It wasn't a look of submission or avoidance, but one of calm authority. He knew this was the moment to prove his leadership, not just under pressure from wealthy parents, but also for Ayana and every other student who trusted that he would protect them fairly after a long pause. Mr. Michael Rell spoke, his tone still authoritative, but full of underlying intimidation. Principal Hughes, I don't think you fully understand the serious consequences this incident could have on our school's reputation. A new student barely transferred has caused a violent incident like this. We are the school's biggest supporters. Are you sure you want to place your trust in a girl like this without worrying about losing the support of this community? Hughes listened calmly, but he didn't flinch at the veiled threat in Mr. Rell's words. He adjusted his posture and spoke in a clear, measured tone, each word carefully chosen. Mr. Riddell, I fully understand my responsibilities and role at this school. However, what I am doing right now is not gambling with the school's reputation. It is protecting fairness and justice for all students before making any decisions. I must be sure we have heard the full truth from all sides. Upon hearing this, Mrs. Emily Hartley immediately lost her patience, interrupting in a harsh tone. What truth is there? My daughter Brianna is now in the nurse's office, traumatized after being brutally attacked. Does this girl's hair matter more than my daughter's hay? Health Hughes looked directly into Mrs. Hartley's eyes, his gaze stern and resolute. Mrs. Hartley, what you consider insignificant is in fact a grave offense to personal dignity and honor. Brianna and her group didn't just cut Ayana's hair. They continuously insulted, mocked, and isolated another student right in the middle of the classroom. And the truth is, it was Brianna's actions that sparked this conflict. Mrs. Hartley's eyes widened in anger, ready to retaliate. But Hughes raised his hand to stop her. I am not justifying Aya's violent response, but I understand that no one in this room would accept their child being treated with such disrespect and cruelty. Without reacting, why should Ayana endure something that none of your children would tolerate if it happened to them? Hughes' words caused an unexpected silence in the room. The parents accustomed to having their opinions prioritized were momentarily taken aback by the sharp and logical argument presented by the principal. However, Mr. Foster Kyle's father was not about to back down so easily. He cleared his throat, his voice heavy, but calculating. Principal Hughes, I believe you are making a grave mistake trusting the story of a new girl over the honorable and reliable students of this school. If this issue is not handled properly, I'm sure you understand the consequence the school will face, especially when our major donors pull their support. The threat was not subtle, but Hughes did not falter. He looked directly into Mr. Foster's eyes, his voice remaining calm yet authoritative. I value the support of our community, but my primary responsibility is to protect fairness and ethics within this school. No amount of funding will make me compromise that. And if you think you can use power or money to force me into making an unjust decision about any student, then I'm afraid you've misjudged me. Hughes's strong statement left the room in a heavy, suffocating silence. The wealthy parents who were used to dominating others now had to face a principal who was not easily swayed. Ayana, who had remained silent up to this point, finally looked up, her eyes filled with deep, deep gratitude and respect for the only man who had stood up for her in the face of clear injustice. Mr. Michael Rell, after a brief pause, stood up slowly, adjusting his suit rigidly. His gaze was cold, and his voice now carried a public threat. If you've made your decision, Principal Hughes, we won't say any more, but be prepared to face the consequences of the decision you made today. We will not let this go easily. Hughes nodded gently. Undeterred by the threat, his voice remained firm and calm. I will always stand by my decisions. Justice will always be upheld at this school, no matter the cost. The room slowly emptied as the wealthy parents left, their faces marked by anger and disappointment. Only Ayana and Principal Hughes remained. He looked at her reassuring and spoke. Softly. You're not alone. Ayana, justice always needs someone brave to protect it, and I will stand by you always after a tense meeting with the wealthy parents. Ayana stepped out of Principal Hughes' office, still feeling the weight in her chest. Although the principal had strongly stood by her side, Ayana knew this battle was far from over the door to power, and prejudice couldn't be shut with just a simple conversation, especially when her opponents were not just a few uninformed students, but a whole system accustomed to protecting the wealthiest and most powerful that afternoon as the school corridors grew quiet. After class, Ayana sat silently in the empty library. The tall, densely packed bookshelves formed a small world, temporarily shielding her from the curious eyes and uncomfortable whispers. Here she was trying to regain her composure, reminding herself that she had done the right thing, that prolonged silence would never change anything, but deep within there lingered an unspoken unease. Because Ayana understood well that to defeat such a force, she would need more than just her own courage. At that moment, the sound of soft footsteps echoed near where she sat, breaking the stillness. Ayana looked up and saw Principal Hughes standing not far from her. He gazed at her with understanding and gentleness, then quietly sat down beside her in the quiet space of the library. His voice was soft, yet very clear. Ayana, I know this is very difficult for you, but I need you to trust me. Trust that together we will get through this. Ayana nodded slightly, feeling a sense of reassurance. Insurance, when she realized that the man sitting beside her wasn't just a principal concerned with preserving the school's reputation, but someone who genuinely cared about justice and doing what was right. I understand, Sir. Ayana replied, her voice lower but still resolute. But I'm afraid the truth may once again be hidden, and everything we do will be in vain. Hughes paused for a moment, then pulled out a small notebook from his jacket pocket and gently placed it in front of Anna. We won't let that happen again. Write down everything you remember. Every incident, every date, every insult. We need clear evidence to face those who want to deny the truth. Ayana looked at the small notebook before her, and a strong sense of conviction surged within her. This time, things might be different. This was no longer a solitary fight. She no longer had to face the system of prejudice and power alone. Now she had a powerful ally in the days that followed. Ayana spent much time carefully recording everything that had happened, from the quiet taunts in the classroom to the deliberate insults like the bumping into her in the hallway. Each page written was a sharp accusation, and she knew that, when the time came, these pieces of evidence would be crucial. Meanwhile, Principal Hughes was also relentlessly seeking additional witnesses and evidence. He quietly observed student interactions around the school, collecting material security footage from areas where bullying typically occurred. Hughes knew that Ayana's account alone would not be enough to convince those trying to conceal the issue. They needed more. Then, one afternoon, as Principal Hughes stayed at school late, he happened to encounter the janitor, Reggie, quietly working near the art room. Reggie was a quiet man, black in his 50s, who always worked silently and kept to himself. But Hughes noticed something unusual in Reggie's eyes when they made eye contact. There was guilt mingled with hesitation, as if he were hiding something very important. Principal Hughes gently approached him, greeting in a friendly manner. "Hello, Mr. Reggie, working late today?" Reggie jumped slightly, hesitating before responding. "Yes, sir, Principal. I'm trying to finish my work today because there's an inspection tomorrow." Hughes nodded slightly, looking at Reggie for a long moment before gently adding, "Mr. Reggie, I know you usually work around the art room. Did you notice anything unusual the day Ayana and Brian Anna had their confrontation?" Reggie froze, a flicker of fear. Crossing his face, his hands instinctively gripping the mop tighter, Hughes immediately recognized his discomfort and placed a reassuring hand on Reggie's shoulder. "I understand what you're worried about. I know you're afraid of losing your job, but we can't let the truth stay hidden. The truth can only come to light if someone has the courage to speak out." Reggie sighed deeply, his head bowed for a long moment. Finally, he lifted his gaze to Hughes, a look of both fear and resolve in his eyes. "I saw everything, sir. I saw Brianna and the other two students clearly planning. Before they used scissors to cut Ayana's hair, I saw Ayana trying to hold back and not start anything first, but I'm afraid if I speak up, I'll lose my job. My family depends on this job." Hughes gave Reggie's shoulder a gentle squeeze, his voice serious but encouraging. "I'll make sure you don't lose your job. Mr. Reggie, I'll protect you at all costs, but you must understand that if you don't speak up, people like Ayana will continue to be hurt and isolated. We have a responsibility to stand up for justice." Reggie looked at Hughes with a look of gratitude, and after a long moment of deep thought, he slowly nodded, his voice full of determination. "Yes, sir. I will testify. I'll tell everything I saw in that moment." Hughes understood that they had just taken a very important step in the battle against injustice at Meadow Ridge High. The truth had finally started to emerge, and this time with clear evidence, justice would not be so easily concealed the moment Janitor Reggie agreed to testify. A new spark of hope seemed to ignite in the long, gloomy sky over Meadow Ridge High. Ayana could clearly feel that this was the moment she needed to take one more bold step, a decisive step, so that the truth could never again be buried by power and prejudice. One quiet afternoon after school, as the last rays of sunlight began to fade across the campus, Ayana received an unfamiliar "your" call from an unknown number. At first she hesitated, but then decided to answer as something inside her told her that this call might be the turning point in the battle she was facing. "Ayana Blake." "Right. This is Lena Mercer, a reporter from the local newspaper." A warm, clear female voice came through on the other end. "I've been following your story over the past few days, and I believe your story needs to be told in full and truthfully." Ayana paused for a moment, a mix of unease and curiosity creeping into her heart. "What do you want to talk to me about?" she asked. Lena's voice was gentle but sincere. "I know exactly what you're going through. The pain, the insults, and the loneliness of having to fight against a system that always favors the powerful. I think it's time for you to speak up, so that no one can continue to ignore the truth." Ayana remained silent for a long while. She knew that if she agreed to this interview, she would face even greater pressure than ever before. But this would also be her chance to shed light on things that had long been hidden beneath the perfect facade of her prestigious school. "I agree," Ayana said, after a brief pause, her voice more firm and resolute. "I'll say everything. I don't want anyone else to go through what I've had to endure." 2 days later, the interview took place at a small, discreet cafe in the city center, away from the curious eyes of the school and powerful parents. Lena Mercer sat across from Ayana, a small recording device placed gently between them. Lena observed Ayana with a look full of sympathy and seriousness before gently starting. "Ayana, Tell me from the beginning, how did everything start? What have you been through? Ayana took a deep breath and began speaking slowly but clearly. For the first time, she opened up about the details of each insult, each cruel joke that Brianna, Austin, and Kyle had subjected her to since she transferred to the school. Ayana didn't hold anything back. She described the pain, the helplessness, and the despair of Silent L, enduring the racial discrimination and bullying that happened at Meadow Ridge High. The most painful part wasn't the act of cutting my hair. Ayana said slowly, her eyes filled with deep sincerity. It was the cold silence from everyone around me. The classmates, the teachers, even those I once hoped would stand by me. It felt like I didn't even exist, as if my worth and dignity weren't worth anyone standing up for. Lena Mercer listened attentively, her eyes reflecting her deep emotion in response to Ayana's heartfelt words. She continued to ask thoughtful questions, allowing Ayana to express her deepest feelings at the end of the interview. Lena took Ayana's hand and said sincerely, "You're very brave." Ayana, what you've just shared will change a lot of things. I promise this story will be told truthfully. Just 2 days later, Lena Mercer's interview was published widely on the local news website with the headline, "A Voice from the Silence: The Pain of a Black Student at Meadow Ridge." The thorough, honest, and profound article quickly spread across social media. Readers were captivated by the raw truth in each sentence. A's heartfelt account of the pain she had silently endured within hours. The art received thousands of shares and comments, drawing massive attention from the local community. On forums, many parents and alumni of Meadow Ridge High began speaking out, exposing years of racial discrimination and bullying at the school. Stories that had been hidden for so long were now being revealed one by one inside Principal Hughes's office. He silently read the article, his face stern, but with a hint of a satisfied smile. He understood that this battle had entered a new phase, a public battle where power and money could no longer manipulate things, as before. The truth was now too clear, and the pressure from the public and the community would force the school and administration to take concrete action at the homes of Brianna, Austin, and Kyle. The atmosphere was tense. Their wealthy families realized they had underestimated the power of the media and public opinion. Constant phone calls poured in from the press. Social media erupted with harsh condemnation, leaving them with no way to hide or manipulate the truth any longer after the article was published. Ayana received hundreds of messages from friends, strangers, and even former classmates who had remained silent in the past, offering their thanks and support for the first time in her life. Ayana felt like she was no longer a lone victim. Now she had become the voice, for many others a symbol, of the fight against the long-standing injustice and prejudice at Meadow Ridge High. And Ayana knew that while the battle was far from over for the first time, there was hope that justice might actually prevail. After Ayana's honest interview went viral, Meadow Ridge High became the center of attention in the community. The stories that had been carefully hidden behind the school's glossy exterior were now being exposed one by one, sparking an uproar of anger from the public. But what shocked everyone even more were the unexpected truths about Brianna Hartley, who had once been seen as a victim before becoming a bully just days after the article appeared. An upperclassman named Jessica Williams, known for her quiet and reclusive nature, unexpectedly posted a long message on social media. In her post, Jessica revealed a completely different side of Brianna. A hidden facet few knew about Jessica recalled the early days when Brianna first transferred to Meadow Ridge. Back then, Brianna was a chubby, shy girl who kept to herself due to insecurities about her appearance. Many other students relentlessly teased her, making cruel remarks about Bree's weight and looks. However, when Jessica and a few other students tried to reach out and help Brianna, instead of accepting their support, Brianna responded with bitterness and anger toward those who were attempting to assist her. She always thought everyone pied her. Jessica wrote in her post, "At first we tried to empathize with her, but over time she became venomous, using the sympathy of others to force them to accept her insults." Brianna used her own pain as a weapon to control others as soon as Jessica shared this truth. A flood of other students began to speak out, sharing similar stories. Each account painted a consistent picture of Brianna, a person who had once been a victim but chose to use her own past pain as an excuse to hurt others. A male student named Lucas Bennett shared a story from last year. Lucas had witnessed Brianna manipulate teachers by using her overweight appearance to manipulate their emotions and thoughts whenever she was criticized for her bullying behavior. Brianna would cry, lamenting the unfairness and suffering she endured, causing teachers to overlook her bad behavior for fear of causing her more emotional harm. Lucas emphasized in his post, "We were tired of seeing that scene." Brianna always played the victim when it was convenient, but the moment she had the chance, she became cruel and domineering. Bullying others, Ayana, was just the latest target she chose to assert her power over. Each of these student accounts was shared widely, creating a comprehensive portrait of Brianna, not just a simple bully, but someone who had turned the pain of her past into a reason to hurt others. The community slowly realized that Brianna could not be excused or justified for her cruel actions, simply because she had once been hurt herself. Jessica and Lucas's posts quickly spread like wildfire, completely changing the public perception of Brianna and her family. Before, Brianna had always been protected by her family, who built the image of a sensitive, fragile girl who always needed to be sheltered. But now that protective facade was completely shattered in her room at home. Brianna read each post, each comment from her peers, with a growing sense of horror and fear. For the first time, she felt the true meaning of isolation. What Brianna had desperately tried to hide for so long was now fully exposed. For everyone to see this harsh reality plunged Brianna into a deep crisis. She had to face the consequences of the wrong choices she had made. Her family, once able to defend her and manipulate the situation with money and influence, now found themselves unable to protect her from the undeniable truth. Emily Hartley, Brianna's mother, who had always done everything she could to shield her daughter, now had to sit quietly, unsure of what to do in the face of this inescapable reality. The Hartley family, once the powerful figures accusing Ayana, now had to face tough, difficult questions from the community principal. Hughes closely monitored the unfolding situation, fully aware that the truth was now beyond the control of powerful families. The battle was no longer just about Ayana, but it became a symbol of the fight against cruelty hidden behind the victim mask. The next morning, Hughes called an emergency meeting with the school board, presenting clear evidence of Brianna's bullying and manipulation of people's emotions. He firmly declared that the school could no longer turn a blind eye to Brianna's actions, or to anyone else who behaved in such a manner. Justice could no longer be bent by blind pity or manipulation by those in power at Ayana's home. She silently read the confessions and shares from her classmates. A strange feeling of compassion for Brianna arose in her. Not because she sympathized with the wrongdoings Brianna had committed, but because Ayana understood that if Brianna had faced her pain more appropriately, things might not have turned out this way. This made Ayana realize more clearly than ever a deep lesson. No matter how great the pain of the past, it can never justify causing further harm to anyone else. It is the choices each person makes that determine whether they will remain a victim forever or rise up to become a protector of justice and truth. And now Ayana believed that the battle she was fighting was not just to protect herself, but to awaken everyone else, those facing their own pain, but not knowing how to overcome it. The series of stories that emerged about Brianna created a powerful wave, causing the entire Meadow Ridge community to no longer remain silent and watch the pressure of public opinion increasingly mounting was now not just targeting individuals, but directly challenging the entire administration that had grown accustomed to covering up and staying silent. Ayana knew that this was the moment when all the efforts she and Principal Hughes had put in would lead to a clear result. One Monday morning, while the school was still wrapped in silence waiting for the next move, students were summoned to the large auditorium. The atmosphere was tense, filled with nervous anticipation. Everyone knew that this meeting was not a typical assembly principal. Hughes stood on the stage. His gaze stern and resolute. Beside him stood the entire school leadership team, their faces no longer confident and calm as they usually were, students. Hughes began with a strong, decisive voice. In recent times, our school has faced extremely serious and unfortunate events. The school has recognized that we have failed in our responsibility to prevent and address bullying and racial discrimination in a timely manner. This is our failure, and we fully accept responsibility for it. Hughes's declaration left the auditorium silent, so quiet that every breath could be heard for the first time. A representative of the school's authority openly acknowledged the failure no one had ever imagined that Meadow Ridge High, with its long-standing reputation and status, would openly admit to its mistakes. His voice grew sharper as he continued, looking directly at the front row, where Ayana sat silently, full of strength. With all the evidence gathered, we can no longer ignore the truth. The school has decided to take firm action against those directly involved in this incident. I announced that effective today, student Brianna Hartley and Kyle Foster will be indefinitely suspended and will have to transfer out of the school. The announcement rang out loudly, clearly, and caused the entire student body to stir, exchanging surprised looks for many. This was the first time they had seen the school take such strict action, especially with Brianna, who had once used pity and personal pain to manipulate others and avoid responsibility. Finally facing the real consequences of her actions, Brianna and Kyle were not present in the auditorium that day. But the news quickly spread across classrooms, hallways, and the campus. Those who had been victims of Brianna's bullying now sighed in relief, feeling that justice had finally come to them. Meanwhile, those who had supported her lowered their heads in silence, avoiding the eyes of others, realizing that no one could protect them from the truth anymore. However, Principal Hughes wasn't finished. His gaze shifted to the left side of the auditorium, where Austin Rell was sitting alone, silent. And cold Austin didn't look up at the stage, his eyes fixed firmly on the floor as though trying to avoid the judgmental stares from all around him. As for student Austin Riddell Hughes continued, his voice deepening, although he did not directly engage in actions that caused serious harm. His encouragement and support of bullying behavior is also unacceptable. Austin will be placed under strict probation for 1 year, and will be stripped of all leadership positions and privileges in school activities. Austin sat motionless, showing no outward reaction, but Ayana knew that he was struggling with deep feelings of shame and loss from someone who had it all: power, respect, and even the fear of others. Austin was now a solitary figure in the very school that had once been his stage people no longer avoided or admired Austin. Instead, there were scrutinizing and disdainful looks, making him feel for the first time in his life as if he had lost his position in control. The meeting ended, and Ayana slowly left the auditorium with the crowd feeling an unexpected sense of relief. The long, tense days had finally taken a clear turn. Truth and justice had achieved a small but meaningful victory. However, Ayana understood that this was not the final end. As she stepped out of the auditorium, she saw Austin standing, silently near the hallway, alone and distant. Ayana realized something important. Austin was no longer the strong person everyone thought he was. He, too, was just a pitiable product of entitlement and privilege, someone who had never been made to face the consequences of his actions now. With all those privileges stripped away, Austin seemed small and weak. Ayana did not feel happy seeing Austin like this, but instead felt a complex mix of sympathy and disappointment. She realized that for real change to happen, people like Austin needed not only to be punished, but also to understand the consequences of their choices. That afternoon, Principal Hughes called Ayana to his office, looking at her with warmth and pride. "Ayana, I want you to know that what you've done has brought about a significant change in this school. But I also want you to understand that this is just the beginning. True change takes time, patience, and compassion." Ayana nodded, understanding the deep meaning in his words. This battle was not just about punishing those who hurt others, but about awakening everyone to the values of fairness, self-respect, and dignity. And she knew from this moment on, Ayana would never be silent again. She would continue to fight not only for herself, but for all those who had been hurt, but had not yet found the strength to speak up and defend themselves. After stepping out of Principal Hughes' office, Ayana stood alone in the long, silent hallway, her mind full of thoughts about everything that had just transpired. A strange feeling rose within her, stronger and clearer than ever before. Ayana knew that there was one final thing she had to do. She needed to confront Austin directly, to firmly assert that she was no longer someone who could be easily hurt or looked down upon. That afternoon, as the sunlight faded and the last ray slanted across the school grounds, Ayana saw Austin standing alone near the back field. It was a spot where Austin used to hang out with his group of friends, basking in the glory of being admired and revered. But now the field was empty, with only Austin. There, a completely unfamiliar figure, quiet and alone like a forgotten shadow. Ayana took a deep breath and walked toward him with steady, determined steps. Hearing her footsteps, Austin flinched and turned his gaze, momentarily confused, as he realized Ayana was approaching him for a moment. It seemed like he wanted to turn and walk away, but something inside him made him stay still, as if he knew it was time to face the consequences of his actions. Austin, Ayana spoke calmly but resolutely. "We need to talk." Austin stared at her without saying a word. His eyes no longer held the arrogance or challenge they once had. Instead, they were filled with doubt, mixed with a touch of shame and hesitation. "What do you want from me now?" Ayana Austin replied in a small, weak voice, completely unlike the confident tone he once had. "I want you to understand something very important," Ayana answered gently, her eyes locking with his, making sure he couldn't avoid her words. "All the things you thought were harmless jokes can actually destroy someone. A word, a small action from you can hurt someone much more deeply than you ever imagined." Austin lowered his head, avoiding Ayana's gaze, but her voice continued strong and unwavering, not allowing him to shy away. You've lived too long in privilege and power that you couldn't see the value of self-respect and human dignity. But now that those things are gone, how does it feel? Can you see the pain you've caused others? Austin bit his lip, his face turning red with shame and helplessness for the first time. He truly felt powerless in front of the girl he had once looked down on, the one he thought was weak and easily hurt. I never thought things would turn out this way. Austin finally spoke, his voice trembling as he struggled to control his emotions. I was wrong, Ayana. I know I was wrong, but I didn't think it was that serious. That's the problem. Austin, Ayana replied, her voice deep yet sharp, filled with resolve. People like you never think about how your words and actions can hurt others because you always think you have the right, that everyone will just accept whatever you do. But no one, not even you, has the right to hurt someone else, for any reason. Austin looked up, his eyes finally meeting Ayana's, sincere, regretful, and full of remorse. He seemed like he wanted to say something more, but his throat tightened, leaving only the silence. To linger, Ayana stepped a little closer, her tone softer now, but still carrying a deep seriousness. I'm not here today to hear an apology. I just want you to understand one thing. True. Strength isn't about hurting others. It's about the ability to control yourself and respect the value of those around you. If you continue to use arrogance and disregard for others, like you did with me, you will never become a better person. Austin stood silent, motionless. In the fading light of the afternoon, for the first time in his life, he truly felt the weight of what he had done. Ayana's words hit him like a loud bell, shaking him out of the shell he had built around himself, a shell formed by power and status. I understand. Now, Austin said quietly, almost as if he was surprised by his own sincerity. I will never forget what you just said. Ayana gave him one last look. Saying nothing more, she had done what she needed to do. Not to prove she was stronger than Austin, but to make a very important point. A person's dignity should never be treated as a joke, and no one has the right to harm others to satisfy their own pride. She turned and walked away, leaving Austin standing alone in the wide-open field. As Ayana stepped out of the school gates, a sense of relief filled her heart. The battle wasn't just about making the bully pay, but more importantly, she had succeeded in awakening the awareness of someone who had once belittled her. Ayana knew that true change only happens when someone faces their own mistakes, and she hoped that from this moment on, Austin would never make the same mistake again. Because from now on, Ayana was no longer a victim. She had overcome every wound and pain stronger than ever, with an unshakable inner strength. When Ayana left her meeting with Austin, she felt a sense of relief, as though she had just shed the final weight that had been lingering. But Ayana knew that the journey couldn't end. Their real change didn't come from punishing or removing a few individuals. It was about awakening consciousness, a commitment to the responsibility of an entire system that had long ignored the silent voices. A week later, Meadow Ridge School organized an unprecedented press conference. This was the final and most powerful response from the school's administration to calm the public uproar, but Ayana knew she wouldn't let this press conference be just a performance to appease public opinion or cover up past mistakes. It was her chance to speak out for real this time, but not to call for pity or revenge, but to assert the value of self-respect and human dignity. That morning, the auditorium was packed, including students, teachers, parents, the press, and even members of the community who were especially concerned about the situation. As Ayana stepped up to the podium, the vast space grew eerily quiet. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on the young black girl who few had known before, but who had now become a powerful symbol of the fight against injustice and prejudice. Ayana stood tall, her eyes gleaming with confidence and calm. She didn't need notes, nor did she need flowery words. Everything she wanted to say had been inside her heart and mind for a long time, through a period of immense challenge. "I stand here today," Ayana began, her voice clear and firm, "not to beg for pity from anyone. I'm not here to get revenge on those who've hurt me. I'm here for one reason. Only responsibility." She paused for a moment, letting her words sink into the minds of everyone in the room. "I once thought that Meadow Ridge was an ideal school, a place where fairness and dignity were absolutely protected, but I was wrong when I walked in here. I immediately realized that my skin color, my status, and my background made me an easy target for disrespect and bullying. I realized that in the eyes of some people my dignity meant nothing." Her voice grew stronger, her gaze locking onto each person in the room, each word echoing clearly. "The issue is not about individuals like Brianna or Kyle or Austin. The bigger issue is the silence from the school, the indifference from the teachers, and the apathy from all of us. It is that silence that hurt me the most, not just because it made me feel abandoned, but because it allowed behaviors like that to continue." The auditorium fell into absolute silence. Ayana's sincere words had struck deep into the hearts of everyone present. Some people lowered their heads as if trying to avoid the painful truth, but they couldn't deny what Ayana was exposing. "I'm not standing here to personally condemn anyone. I'm standing here to demand real change from the education system. Schools aren't just places where we learn knowledge. They are where we learn how to be human. But if the school continues to allow injustice and discrimination, then we are failing in the highest mission of education." Ayana's gaze swept over the familiar faces in the auditorium, finally resting on Principal Hughes, who was still looking at her with respectful support. Her voice softened slightly, but didn't lose any of its power. "I am so grateful for those who have bravely stood by me. Principal Hughes, Mr. Reggie, and the students who dared to speak the truth. But I hope that, from now on, we won't have to rely on the courage of just a few people. I hope that justice and dignity will always be protected as a given, not something we have to fight for." Ayana paused, taking a deep breath. Her words now rang out gently, but profoundly. Reaching straight into the hearts of everyone, we all have a responsibility to create this change. Never think that hurting others is just a harmless joke, because behind every careless word, every thoughtless action is a person with feelings, self-respect, and dignity that deserve to be respected. If we don't start here in this school, we will never be able to hope for a better world." Ayana's final words ended in a deep silence. The room remained still for a few seconds, and then slowly, applause began, faint at first, but growing stronger and more determined. The entire auditorium rose to their feet, showing their empathy, respect, and solidarity with everything Ayana had just said in one corner of the room. Principal Hughes smiled softly, his eyes shining with infinite pride. He knew that Ayana had done something no speech of his or anyone else's could ever do. She had awakened the conscience and responsibility of each person present in that moment. Ayana understood that she was no longer alone. She was no longer just a victim of injustice. She had become the voice of those who had suffered in silence, but had never found the courage to speak. And it was Ayana's powerful, honest voice that had begun to change everything from Meadow Ridge High to the places beyond, where every person who witnessed and heard her story would never again turn their back on the truth or remain silent in the face of injustice. As the applause in the auditorium slowly faded, Ayana stepped down from the podium with a sense of peace. Like never before, the words she had just shared not only closed a difficult chapter in her life, but also opened a new door, a place where silence and injustice no longer had room to thrive, and where the power of truth was recognized as an unchanging value. From that day forward, Ayana Blake was no longer just a shy transfer student who had been bullied. She became a living symbol of courage and the will to fight against injustice and racism. Ayana's story quickly spread beyond the walls of the school, reaching every street corner, family, and community. Far and wide, the girl who had once endured in silence now stood strong as a powerful testament that anyone could be the one to create real change. The event at Meadow Ridge didn't end with just a press conference. For the first time in the school's long history, new policies were put into place and strictly enforced to prevent acts of racism and bullying. Those who had once turned a blind eye or remained indifferent now had to face their personal responsibilities. The school no longer ignored sensitive issues, but directly organized discussions, life skills, education, programs, and cultural awareness initiatives to promote tolerance and mutual respect. Among the most significant changes was the establishment of student-led support groups committed to ensuring that no one would have to suffer in silence again. Whenever a new student walked into the school, they no longer faced suspicious or cold stares, but instead were met with friendly, welcoming glances. This became the most important legacy Ayana had left for future generations of students. Meanwhile, Ayana returned to the old boxing gym where she had trained whenever the pressures of life became overwhelming. But this time, Ayana wasn't there to fight. She returned to teach and inspire the children who were just like her children, still struggling to find the strength within themselves. Children who hadn't yet realized their true worth amid criticism and hurt. Each afternoon, Ayana patiently guided each child in how to control their emotions, build self-confidence, and stand strong against cruel words without being drawn into a cycle of violence or hatred. Her eyes always shone brightly with passion as she shared her own experiences, because Ayana understood that these children needed guidance from someone who had been through exactly what they were facing. One afternoon, after finishing her training session, Anna returned home quietly. Stepping into her small room, she slowly opened the drawer of her desk, retrieving a small, dark wooden box that had been carefully kept. Opening the box, Ayana gazed at the thick braid of hair that had been cut off that day, a keepsake that reminded her of the pain, but also stood as the strongest symbol of what she had overcome and conquered. That braid of hair was no longer just a painful relic of the past, but had become an important symbol of Ayana's resilience and inner strength. Every time she looked at that braid, she was reminded that no one could take her worth and dignity away unless she allowed it to happen. It was a reminder she carried with her, inspiring her to continue fighting and helping others find the strength they had lost. In a short time, Ayana's story didn't just stay within the walls of Meadow Ridge. It became a shared story spreading across other schools and communities. Anti-bully forums began using Ayana's story as a prime example to teach students about the serious consequences of seemingly harmless actions, and more importantly, how to face and overcome harm. Ayana continued to receive hundreds of letters and messages from people she had never met. They were children who had been bullied, those who had felt alone, who had suffered injustice just like she had. Ayana responded to each letter with sincerity and deep empathy, always trying to make sure everyone understood that they were not alone in this fight. Principal Hughes, now a close ally, constantly encouraged and supported Ayana with every new step she took. He often reminded her that she had accomplished a miracle that even he had never imagined, changing a system that had once been too rigid and unjust, all through the power of courage and truth on graduation day at Meadow Ridge. Ayana stepped onto the stage to receive her diploma amidst thunderous applause from hundreds of people as she walked down. Many friends, teachers, and even strangers came up to hug her. Thanking her for everything she had done in that moment, Ayana realized that her legacy was not in fame or any title, but in the real changes she had helped bring about, in the lives she had touched and made better. Before leaving the school, Ayana took one last look at Meadow Ridge, her heart filled with pride and gratitude. The challenges she had faced there would never be erased, but more importantly, they had taught her invaluable lessons about self-worth and the power of courage. The braid that had been kept carefully by Ayana still reminded her of something very important. No matter how tough life gets, always remember that no one has the right to take your value. Only you can decide your own story from this point forward. Ayana Blake's story would forever serve as an inspiration for anyone who had ever felt weak or lost a powerful, vibrant, and lasting legacy, affirming that everyone deserves to be protected, respected, and loved. A's story is not just a lesson in personal strength, but a living proof that anyone can rise against injustice, prejudice, and bullying. Sometimes all it takes is one courageous voice to make the world change in ways we never imagined, and you. If you were Ayana, what would you do when faced with a similar situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story meaningful and worth spreading, please like, share the video, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to catch the next inspiring stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.